What is the rule of law? Well, as has been already mentioned, it is one of the British values that has been mentioned in the SMSC guidance, but is quite often misunderstood. So it isn't simply a statement of what the law is, nor is it simply obeying the law. And teaching the rule of law is not simply about teaching what the law is or how the justice system works. It's something that's much more values-based. So what we're actually asking is, what does a good justice system look like? We're actually giving standards or qualities, if you like, that justice systems should be measured against and that good justice systems should aspire to be. So it's not a science, but there are some generally agreed indicators of what a good justice system looks like that upholds the rule of law. And it's quite often easier to identify these hallmarks when explaining what the rule of law is. So first of all then, equality before the law. There are two components to this, having equal benefit of the law and being equally subject to the law. The first, equal benefit of the law. When we talk about benefits, we mean rights, opportunities, entitlements that we have under the law, and we should all have equal benefit of them, meaning things like pensions, for example, or the right to an education, the right to access to health service, for example. The flip side of the coin, being equally subject to the law, suggests that we have equal responsibilities before the law. So if someone breaks the law, they face consequences for that on an equal basis. We wouldn't expect, for example, that the rich or the powerful would get away with what they have done, while the normal man on the street should have to face up to consequences. Next element then, clarity and certainty of the law. So this is quite a lot to do with fairness, one of the values that you saw at the beginning of the presentation. In order for the law to be clear and certain, people have to understand what the law is and what they should and shouldn't do in order to avoid a penalty. And you have to be reasonably certain what the outcome is going to be if you follow a set of rules. This is a sort of quite logical principle of fairness. So, for example, the law shouldn't be so complex and change so often that we don't know what the law is. We need to be able to be sure what we can and what we can't do. Lastly, there shouldn't be too much discretion within the law. What is a discretion? Discretion is a choice or a power given to certain public authorities to make certain decisions. So, for example, that might be the power given to a local authority to make a housing allocation. There's nothing wrong in itself with a discretion, but in order for the law to be clear and certain, what we're saying is that there shouldn't be too much of a discretion. It shouldn't be too broad. Otherwise, it becomes too subjective and down to the individual who's exercising that discretion. Next, the exercise of power. So, Parliament confers upon public bodies and public authorities certain powers. For example, this might be stop and search powers of the police, again, to take the example of local authorities allocating social housing. There's nothing inherently wrong with power, again. It's just that powers have to be used for the right purpose and within the limits conferred. If someone goes beyond that, then it's an abuse of power. Next, access to justice. There are two different components to this. I think, firstly, when we say access to justice, the first thing that we need to have is the machinery, the machinery within the justice system with which to resolve disputes. So whether that be a criminal case that's in a court or a civil case. What we need beyond that, beyond the machinery of simply having the court system, is being able to access that. And what that means for us as individuals means having the representation within court and also access to legal advice. Now, this costs money, and where people can't afford to pay for it, in order to have real access to justice, this needs to be paid for by the state. Next, fair trial. In order to get the right outcome, you have to meet certain conditions for the trial process and also the pre-trial process. So, for example, that's to include if you were arrested and charged with an offence. For example, you need to be told what your rights are, what you're being charged with, and so on. I won't say too much about this because actually Darren's going to cover some of this in his worked example. Now then, moving on to human rights, if we just think about all the points that we've just discussed, they're mainly procedural. So we could have all of these bullet points existing within a justice system and yet still not comply with the rule of law. Why is that? Well, because if we think about a system where laws are inherently unfair, unjust, discriminate against certain sectors of society, even if that law is being implemented, even if it's clear and certain, if it applies equally to everyone, that law would still be inherently, qualitatively, it would be non-compliant with the rule of law because there's still one element missing, which is the respect for individual liberties. Therefore, we need human rights as a substantive component of the law in order to comply with the rule of law. Lastly, international law. States need to comply with international law in order to comply with the rule of law, because just as we are members of our domestic community and have responsibilities towards our domestic communities, states have responsibilities within the international community. Lastly, the conclusions on rule of law teaching. Messages that we're trying to dispel, which I think some teachers have come to us and said that it's quite difficult to teach about law and justice because some students feel that law isn't for them, that it only serves certain sectors of society. This is something that we're trying to dispel through teaching the rule of law, that it's something inclusive, that it's something for everyone. And the other message that is very important for students is the idea that we can change things. Sometimes the system does fall short, and that it's important to equip ourselves with the knowledge and the tools to be able to point out where the justice system has fallen short, and to equip ourselves with the knowledge of how we can change things through the right channels. As I said, that was a very quick whiz through, so I'm happy to take questions afterwards.